You're listening to a 3CR podcast created in the studios of independent community radio station 3CR in Melbourne, Australia. For more information, go to allthews.3cr.org.au.
3CR is about community, and we welcome your participation at the station.
3CR is open to a wide diversity of volunteers and is a great way to connect with Melbourne's activist community.
Have you ever thought about volunteering, doing a reception shift, getting a program on air?
Training in radio skills or contributing to one of the station's committees.
There are many ways to be involved at 3CR.
To find out more, go to 3cr.org.au and get in touch.
That plot destruction, sorcerer of death's construction, in the fields of bodies burning, as the war machine keeps turning, death and hatred to mankind, poisoning their brainwashed mind.
Welcome to the Anarchist World This Week, broadcast across Australia on the National Community Radio Satellite. Listen to the Anarchist World This Week, Australia's sacred cow slaughterhouse. Listen to analysis of local, national, international events. Listen to analysis you'll never hear anywhere else.
Well, welcome to the Anarchist World This Week on your local community radio station, courtesy of the Community Radio Network. This program is streaming live on 3cr.org.au. My name's Joseph Toscano. I'm hosting today's program. If you wonder what anarchy is all about, no, it's not about the current chaos in the world today. Anarchos means without rulers. What's causing the chaos in the world today? Obviously, inequalities of power and wealth. Very simple concept. Anarchism is very simple. You don't need a PhD. You don't even need to go to primary school. And many anarchists in the old days never actually went to school. It's about creating a society without rulers, where the people involved in the decision make that decision and elect or appoint delegates to coordinate those decisions, if necessary, at a local, regional, national, maybe possibly international level. Society where wealth is held in common and used for the common good. Very, 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 very conservative concepts, which we seem to have forgotten about. And we're more interested, obviously, in watching the pearls drop out of the wisdom of our rulers. Some are self-appointed, some are elected, but that's the way it goes in the world in 2025. Now, I'm interested in the concept of outrage. Now, I was laughing to myself. Well, see, the thing about Australia is we like to become outraged. Now, was it last week there was this huge pile-on and outrage about this dumb influencer from the US of A who grabbed a baby wombat and then was stupid enough to post it. There was outrage. Outrage. Everywhere. To the point that she decided to go home before she was deported. And I'm thinking to myself, what type of world do I live in where obviously somebody interfering for baby wombat isn't very nice? But is it really something we should have national outrage about? And I thought to myself, is this part of the Australian character where we really don't like as a people to actually become involved in anything that's significant? Now, I was born in this country almost 75 years ago, and feigned outrage about the most minuscule events seems to be part of the Australian way. Now, obviously, it's a great way to deflect us from more important issues. Well, obviously, if you're a wombat, the fact that you've been pinched off your mum by some dumb influencer, is important to the wombat. Maybe a few people around it, but national outrage. Now, overnight, you may have noticed that 400 Palestinians, including over 120 children, were blown to bits by those brave people in the Israeli Defence Forces. Really brave people, bombing wherever they like, reducing Gaza to rubble. Where is the outrage? Where is the outrage? Our government can't even condemn what's happened, while people like the accidental buffoon, Mr. Dutton, congratulate the Israeli government for its forceful response to the terrorists. Okay? Outrage. How about outrage about the 1 in 6 Australian children living in poverty? We have private charities in this country raising money to send Aussie kids to state-funded primary schools and secondary colleges, mainly primary schools, to ensure they've got the right uniform and can go on excursions, get those little extras. Where's the outrage that in a country as rich as Australia, 1 in 6 Australian children live in poverty? Where is the outrage regarding the continuing destruction of First Nations people due to a colonisation process which we failed to acknowledge? Where is that outrage? When over and over again we have statistics which highlight the terrible situation in many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. And I'm thinking to myself, where is the outrage when we have legislation by media? Allegations seems to be the order of the day. Now, I could allege that Mr. Albanese has a tattoo behind his left ear, which means he's a Manchurian candidate. Now, when you get serious allegations made about organisations like the CFMEU and other organisations, and you see this, this genuflexing by our Australian political leaders to this feigned indignation, where's the outrage? Now, I could go on and on and on in this program talking about outrage. Now, I know there are some situations we feel totally hopeless and helpless about. I mean, when you're confronted with the horror of Gaza, and I'll just go through a few steps. Now, this wasn't just a bombing raid. Let's not forget about 10 days ago, a blockade of food and all resources occurred. Then we had a shutdown of electricity, which meant the desalination plant couldn't work, which meant that water became scarce. So you got food and water scarcity. So we've got a government which is using starvation as a mechanism via which to obtain its particular ends. And we get governments like the United States of America saying, this is good. Then we got governments like the Australian government saying, well, we can't really condemn this. Remember October the 7th? And it goes on, right? But somebody temporarily pinches a wombat baby from a wombat, and it's total national outrage. So I'll leave it with you. no solutions to it. But we do have a social media and a legacy media which feasts on feigned outrage, whether it's outrage about increasing crime, outrage about this, outrage about that. But when it comes to the important issues like the fact that 1/3 of Australians live on social security benefits and live a hand-to-mouth existence, no outrage. The fact that younger people are having more and more difficulty accessing accommodation, as well as older people, no outrage. A few titters here and there. People like us, people like you and me say, tut, 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 but no national outrage, no national conversation. All right, I'll move on. Is it part of the Australian character? I'll leave it up to you. Now, Mr. Buffolini, the president of the land of the brave and free, Mr. Buffolini, I don't mention that man's name. It's a little bit like somebody who's been involved in a mass atrocity. We don't mention their name for a very, very good reason. So we don't actually, hold them up as some type of example. Well, Mr. Buffolini, the president of the US of A, and why is it Buffolini? Well, he acts like a buffoon and he acts like Mussolini. And Mussolini came to a sticky end, and so did Nero, but that's a different story. Now, we know that Mr. Buffolini is a very, very important person, they tell me. Not that I would know anything. Now, do you know Mr. Buffolini has a glass jaw? Now, something extraordinary happened last week in the US of A, and I'm not talking about tariffs and, removing money from universities and doing this and mass sackings, all that stuff. I mean, the Americans voted for Buffolini. They may have buyer's regret, but that's their problem. But I did find it amusing that Mr. Buffolini expelled the South African ambassador from the land of the brave and the free, the US of A. That's right. Not the Russian ambassador. No, not the Chinese ambassador, but the South African ambassador. And why did they expel the South African ambassador? Because he had the audacity to claim the emperor has no clothes. Guess what the lad said? Could have been a lass, I'm not sure who the South African ambassador was. That the Buffolini administration, or the new administration, Republican-led administration, was a white supremacist administration. And you get expelled as the ambassador of South Africa. Maybe they're unhappy that South Africa's taken, the butchers in Israel. I don't mean the butchers, the butcher shops, but I mean the real butchers, to the International Criminal Court. And an arrest warrant has been issued against the Prime Minister of Israel. Now, I wouldn't want to raise that with you. It's not very pleasant. Isn't that extraordinary? Isn't that extraordinary? Even at the height of the Cold War, the Russian ambassador or the USA ambassador weren't expelled from each other's country. But when somebody tells the truth that the Buffolini administration, the US of A, is a white supremacist administration, bang, no free speech. And it comes to the universities, no free speech. And if you don't toe the line, guess what? They remove funding. And if you're part of the poor old legacy media and you think you're going to be able to share the pearls of wisdom drooling out of the mouth and the spit of Buffolini, the president of the USA, guess what? They've been denied access to the media conferences. Isn't it wonderful? Isn't it wonderful? But again, I've got a problem. Yeah, well, I don't really have a problem. Well, I do have a problem. We all have problems, but I don't want to bore you with that. See, we've got an accidental buffoon in this country. Accidental. That's Mr. Dutton, the leader of the Liberal opposition. Now, Mr. Dutton has got a problem. He's got a big problem. He's tied his apron strings to an anti-union agenda. He's tied his apron strings to the US of A, Buffolini, and he's tied his apron strings with the Israeli government under Netanyahu. And he's tied his apron strings to the nuclear movement and the climate change doesn't exist movement. About the only thing he hasn't done is tie the Liberal Party's apron string to the anti-vax movement, but that's a different story. So, he's got a problem. He's beginning to look more and more like a buffoon. The fact is, buffoons do get elected, and buffoons do have important implications, even if it's little old Australia. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in the next few weeks, whether we see any positive, it's a terrible word using positive, or any policies come out of the Liberal National Party. Who knows? I may be surprised. Now, I am a little perplexed. I'm always perplexed, but I'm more perplexed than normal today. And I'll tell you why I'm perplexed. I'm perplexed because you don't have to be a genius to realise that the privatisation of essential services leads to problems. We saw the problems in the financial sector that emerged as part of the Royal Commission to the financial sector. Yeah, you may have forgotten about that a few years ago. And we saw the problems in the aged care sector when the sector was privatised courtesy of Mr. John Howard. And now we've got the four corners of the Australian Broadcasting Corporation telling us that there are problems in the early childhood development sector. And many of these problems are laid at the feet of privatisation. Now, you don't have to be a genius or a PhD candidate or a university graduate or a high school graduate to understand that capitalism is an idea based on the concept of private investment for private profit. Simple. Even an idiot like me understands that, all right? Private investment for private profit. No private profit, bankruptcy. Bang. End of that investment. Okay? Now, when you privatise a particular aspect of everyday life, like aged care, early childhood development, the financial sector, energy sector, important elements of our society, well, critical elements of our society, and you introduced a private investment for private profit motive into the equation, and the government at the local, state and federal levels offloads its responsibility to provide services to the community that it represents, and you introduce a profit motive into the equation, there's going to be problems. Problems. It's logical. You privatise the Commonwealth Bank, problems. You privatise telecom, problems. You privatise the ports, problems. You privatise the airports, problems. major problems based on the fact that a relationship between two groups, the state and the individual, has been a great gate crash by a third to create a ménage à trois. It's a little bit like this, right? You're too tired to stimulate your sexual partner. You just had, it's been a bad day. So you pay a third agent to do the job for you. And that's what privatisation is about. It's about abrogating the responsibility of the state to provide essential services to the community. Very simple. Nothing radical about it. What you do is you outsource your responsibility. Now, in order to ensure that the privatisation, creates profits for the new entrants, you need to do two things. One, you need to pass legislation which enhances their ability to make a profit. And two, you need to set up a regulatory agency which doesn't have the staff or the law to actually keep an eye on that particular sector. And this is what we're seeing in the aged care sector. And this is what we saw in the aged care sector. And this is what we're seeing now in the early childhood development sector. Simple. Very simple. If you're going to privatise an essential service which normally doesn't create a profit, well, then you need to do things to ensure those private entities make a profit, or that particular service disintegrates. So you pass laws or pass legislation which has minimal effect on the providers of that privatised service, and then you make a hullabaloo about all these regulatory agencies which are going to make sure that people get looked after. And guess what? All these regulatory agencies don't actually have the law on their side, or more importantly, even if they don't have the law on their side, the staff to actually police those laws. Now, I've seen a lot of commentary in the last 24 to 48 hours regarding the four corners expose, in inverted commas, of the early childhood sector, but very little commentary on the fact that it was the privatisation of that sector and the marginalisation of the community and not-for-profit sector in that area which has led to many of these problems today. I mean, the state seems to have forgotten one very important lesson that was learnt in the 19th and 20th century, especially in so-called Western representative democracies. And that lesson is that if you allow entrenched economic inequality to grow, which we are doing in this country, you will create a climate of social dislocation and increasing violence in the community. And it doesn't matter how many laws you pass, how many jails you build. The fact is, if the system is based on rotten stumps, nothing you can do can fix that system until you replace the stumps. Now, people say to me, "Oh, Jono, it's all too hard. I've got a headache thinking about it, and I can't do anything about it. I prefer to watch pay for the privilege of watching the Australian Football League, formerly called the Australian Football League. My footy team. or I need to have a flutter on the pokies or the dogs, or there's this new movie or this new game I want. I mean, why should I worry about what's going on? It'll all come out in the wash. Well, will it all come out in the wash? Think about it. You're listening to the Anarchist World This Week, broadcast across Australia by the Community Radio Network. This program is streaming live on 3cr.org.au. My name is Joseph Toscano. This program is podcast. It comes to you from the studios of 3CR in Melbourne. You can access the podcast by going to 3cr.org.au. Going to give you a few sites you can look at. Whether you look at them or not, well, that's up to you. We've all got limited time on the planet, as they say. YouTube channels, public interest before corporate interests. Facebook page, Joseph Toscano. Another YouTube channel, josephtoscano.nam. You can go anarchistmedia.org. pibci.net, which means public interest before corporate interest.net. You name it, it's out there. It's not a matter of being out there. It's really a matter of actually, catching people's interests. And not only catching people's interests, but highlighting that change comes through struggle. And if we're not willing or able to challenge that change, things get worse. If our descendants, not our descendants, our antecedents, I should say, saw what has happened to our societies, well, the societies we live in, they're not ours, over the last 50 years, they would be pulling their hair out. Why do you think we have a social security net in this country? Why do you think we have a universal healthcare system? Why do you think we have a national disability insurance scheme? Why do you think we have had, public infrastructure? Why do you think we had essential services managed by the state and owned by the state, not by the private sector? Think of the tens of thousands of people forgotten, even in this country, who struggled to ensure that future generations had access to the Commonwealth. We do live in the Commonwealth of Australia. Think how they would feel when they realise everything they fought for has been washed away in a tsunami of privatisation, in a tsunami of corporatisation, in a tsunami of deregulation, and a tsunami of globalisation. Not only have we failed as a generations to look after the interest of future generations, we fail consistently to acknowledge, let alone acknowledge the effort and the sacrifice that went into creating structures which we take for granted, which were about using the Commonwealth for the common good. And that's the dilemma we face in 2025. You see, history began this morning when I woke up. Did you know that? And that's the dilemma. Many Australians, if not a great majority of Australians, don't have the time to even reflect about what's happening. Trying to make do. Strangled by a financial sector which lends money and then demands its pound of flesh, and strangled by a workplace culture which has even removed the right to strike outside an enterprise bargaining agreement period from the tactics that can be used by a workforce to improve their situation. What a pathetic state of affairs. So, what can you do about it? Well, you can cry into your porridge in the morning if you eat porridge or your coffee. You can throw things, at your television set. You can throw your computer outside, and jump up and down on it. You can take your anger out on the other, a very popular pastime in this community. Those First Nations people, who get more than they deserve. And those terrible immigrant types, You can join some group that says, wah, 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 we're going to solve our problems by solving the migration problem or solving the First Nations problem, which basically means is battering them down with sticks and stones. You can join a little group, which is all good for you, positive, helps to, negotiate the situation we find ourselves in. Because let's not forget, despair and hopelessness is the aphrodisiac of the ruling classes. As we see in Gaza, the Israeli authorities believe that by continuing to repress and destroy the Palestinian community in that little enclave half the size of Melbourne, there'll be so much hopelessness and wretchedness and despair that people will, fold over. All they're doing is creating generations of militants who'll be fighting against the Israeli state for generations to come, long after you and I have disappeared. And it's the same in this country. But see, we don't channel our anger at the situation we find ourselves in into organisations which demand reform, which demand change. We tend to, as a people, sit on the fence and say, somebody should do something about that. Never thinking that it's you and me, should do something about that. Never us. It's always somebody else. Or, I'm going to do this. You see, it goes like this. You go to school, you try to get ahead. You say, well, when I finish school, I'm going to do this. I'm going to help, all right? Then you start work and you're saddled by debt. Oh, I'm going to do this once I pay off the mortgage. Then the kids come along and they've got all their expenses. Well, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that once they're off my hands. Then you retire and you realise there's not enough money in your superannuation fund and you've become a primary carer for the grandkids while your kids go to work to pay off their mortgage, and you say, I'll wait. And when are you going to wait till? Till the day you die. And I've never seen any dead people come back, to be involved in things. So we need to make the effort. Now, it's easy for me to pontificate, on this program. Talk is cheap. I mean, talk's important in terms of bringing ideas to people they may never have thought about. Talk is important in terms of creating solidarity. Talk is important in terms of generating discussion that goes beyond the superficial discussions we have on a day-to-day basis. But talk by itself, which is not accompanied by action, ultimately creates despair. Because if you've got hope, as I said, the love child, desire and expectation, the desire for change and the expectation that change will occur, and you're just kind of paralysed in the desire phase, nothing changes. Now, look at the situation in Serbia today. You had hundreds of thousands of people on the streets against their government for, corruption. The situation in Northern Macedonia. where over 60 people were killed in a fire in a club from a population of 25,000, where people are taking to the streets because of the innate corruption in these societies. Change comes when you place pressure on the people that you elect to represent you to take your concerns seriously. It only comes when they fear you more than they fear the 1% that own the means of production, distribution, exchange and communication, which ultimately pull the parliamentary strings in terms of the type of legislation which goes through Parliament. So, what am I doing about it? Well, personally, this is just a personal odyssey. You know, maybe it's a Don Quixote tilt at windmills. Who knows? Now, there is a federal election in the offing I'll call it within the next 3 to 4 weeks, and we'll all be over by the end of May. We'll have a new government to pass legislation, all right? Could be led by the accidental buffoon, Mr. Dutton. Could be led by the I'm going to do something about this someday, Mr. Albanese. Could even be led by a green or a teal revolution. You never know what happens in a big city, especially when the forces which want to maintain the status quo throw everything at destroying the reputation of those that oppose them. But that's a different ball game. So, after a little bit of thinking and after a little bit of some people asking me, I decided to look at Flinders electorate on the Mornington Peninsula. Interestingly, in 1929, the people of Flinders actually voted out Mr. Bruce, Stanley Bruce, the Prime Minister. And before John Howard was voted out from his own constituency over a decade ago, and this has never happened before. So it's an interesting electorate. It's also an interesting electorate because it's a blue ribbon Liberal seat. I'm sick and tired of seeing people with similar ideas fight each other trying to gain a seat. I mean, if you really want to be in the fray, you need to give those people who represent the 1% that own the means of production, distribution and exchange the greatest heartache. You need to be the burr under the saddle. It doesn't mean that you're going to win. The whole purpose of standing in an election campaign, especially a federal election campaign, is not about winning or losing. It's about having the potential to present ideas to a population that thinks, that is in a position to think about what they're going to do in terms of their voting intentions. So, look, I'm interested, with some local support, in standing the electorate of Flinders. But what's been happening over the last decade or two, that things have been made a bit more difficult for independent candidates. Currently you need $2,000. Now, I'm happy to put up that money, all right? That's not a problem to stand. But I do have a problem. I need at least 100 people in the electorate of Flinders to nominate me, and currently we've got about halfway. Now, obviously, time is running out. Now, if you're interested in a campaign which is focused on inequality, not a teal campaign which is focused on, the climate emergency, integrity and women, but a campaign that goes a little bit further, that looks at the underlying structures, that looks at what happens when we privatise essential services, that looks at the taxation system and how it's wrought it to such a degree that we have to, wait for the crumbs to be brushed off the corporate table. We're out there under the corporate table, salivating, waiting for the crumbs to be brushed off, and then we fight each other for the crumbs. And we don't like the hat that person's wearing, so we try to exclude them from the crumbs because the situation we find ourselves in is all their fault, not the fault that power and wealth is concentrated in fewer and fewer hands. So, look, if you do live in the electorate of Flinders, or you know somebody who lives in the electorate of Flinders, well, this Saturday, that's the 22nd of March, we're holding a gathering, a barbecue, whatever you like to call it, in Rosebud. Across the road from the Rosebud Hotel, next to the Village Green, next to the Rosebud Bowls Club. You can't miss it. And if you require public transport, you can catch the 788 or the 887 bus. So this is just my little drop in the ocean, okay? Whether it comes off or not, who knows? But at least I can say that I did something. I just didn't talk. I actually did something, or I tried to do something. I may have succeeded, and I become a candidate in that electorate. I may have failed, but at least I tried. And that's what I'm saying to people. You need to try to make a difference. Every significant social, cultural, political movement that has occurred in the history of the world has occurred because somebody at some point in time took a stand. Whether it was the Reformation with Martin Luther, whether it was the abolition of slavery, whether it was representative democracy, whether it's a social security system, and the list goes on and on, somebody took a stand and said, this is unacceptable. We live in a community. We are not, as we're told constantly, a society of isolated individuals talking to each other on the net about nothing in particular, everything. We are a community. We need to live side by side. So think about it. What are you going to do for this federal election? Well, you can shrug your shoulders and say, well, it's pretty useless. I'm not going to even vote. You know, you may shrug your shoulders and say, maybe I'll vote for the least, offensive candidate on the list. But think about why there isn't that range of candidates. Because currently, if you want to run a successful federal electorate campaign, or even run one, you need a minimum of $1 million to run such a campaign. So we now see the situation where the whole system has been subverted to ensure those who, carry out the policies and talk about the policies of the 1% continue to be elected and re-elected. So I'll leave it up to you. I'm doing my bit. Hopefully you do your bit. You're listening to the Anarchist World This Week, broadcast across Australia via the Community Radio Network. Now, I was interested to hear that the Foreign Minister, Madam Wong, was quite concerned, very concerned, and I don't blame her, about the intimidation and surveillance of pro-democracy activists from Hong Kong who found themselves living in Australia today. It is a concern when you get foreign governments kind of poking their noses into the affairs of our of Australian permanent residents and citizens. Because if they're poking their nose into their affairs, whose other affairs are they poking their noses in? But I never, I don't want to bore you for another never, hear the Foreign Minister or the acting Foreign Minister or the Prime Minister or the Prime Minister in waiting Mr. Peter Dutton, the Right Honourable Peter Dutton, brackets the accidental buffoon, talk about the Indonesian surveillance and intimidation of West Papuan activists in this country. An ongoing problem for decades. And the problem has been magnified by the establishment of the West Papuan office at 838 Collins Street in Dockland. Now, those of you who are regular listeners to the program know that I'm the convener for the West Papuan Rent Collective. And the West Papuan Rent Collective is a very simple concept. It's so simple that even I can do it. It's about encouraging Australians, permanent residents, citizens, refugees, whatever, to become part of the West Papuan Rent Collective. And the West Papuan Rent Collective is one aim and one aim only. Our aim is to ensure, that's right, our aim is to ensure the West Papuan community can conduct their independent struggle in the way they see fit by creating a space for them from which to work from. And the West Papuan office, supported by the West Papuan Rent Collective, has now been functioning for a decade. Now, obviously, surveillance and intimidation of activists is a day-to-day proposition if you're a West Papuan in this country, especially if you're a West Papuan who is involved with the office or opens their mouth. So, every 4 months we have a gathering at the West Papuan office at 838 Collins Street in Docklands, 838. Catch a tram there. Now, Sunday the 30th, which is, almost 11 days away, Sunday the 30th of March will be holding the first event for 2025 to mark the 10th anniversary of the West Papuan office. And you're all invited, every single listener. You don't have to be a member of the West Papuan Rent Collective, but it'd be nice if you joined when you came. There's lunch at 1. That's Sunday the 30th. Lunch at 1, speakers between 2 and 3, and then an auction to try to raise a bit extra funds for the West Papuan Rent Collective. So if you find yourself in Melbourne on the 30th, come along. If you can't come along, think about joining the West Papuan Rent Collective. If you want to join, you can always contact the West Papuan office, or you can leave a message on 0439 395 489, 0439 395 489. Culture's an interesting concept, isn't it? Culture. And human DNA is an interesting concept, isn't it? Because DNA is DNA and culture is culture, and never the twain shall meet. And that's the interesting thing about human DNA. It doesn't matter who we are. We have the same sequence. Occasionally, when a simple pathway in one sequence of DNA is interrupted, you can have major implications for that individual, say an individual with Down syndrome, major lifelong implications. But ultimately, when you look at DNA, there's no such thing as race. We're part of the human family. But when you look at culture, culture is a varied concept. We've had cultures in the past, say Celtic cultures, where you had to sacrifice children to put them under the stumps of some, temple you're going to erect. Or cultures where you need to rip out the heart of victims to ensure the sun continues to revolve around the earth. Or cultures, which we're very familiar with, where we destroy First Nation people after First Nation people in order to acquire their wealth, their land and their wealth, so we can impose our own cultural traditions on them, because obviously our culture, which is an acquisitive culture and a destructive culture, is a much more nice culture, isn't it? So culture, so what is culture? If our DNA is so very similar, why, for example, in the New Guinea highlands, you've got different cultures in different parts of the New Guinea highlands because of the topography, where different groups developed with minimal interaction with the groups around them because of the difficult topography. See, I've been looking at culture for a long time, and culture comes in many forms, and we may find things that happened in the past quite troubling. But the fact is, they did happen, and they did happen for a particular reason. The thing about culture is that, to a large degree, it reinforces the status quo. It reinforces the inherent inequalities within a particular community. It doesn't mean that culture necessarily reinforces inequalities, but in the majority of cases it reinforces those inequalities. So we really need to look at culture as well as politics, because culture has a exceptionally important impact on the type of society we become. Now, changing culture can be difficult for one very good reason, because when you attempt to change culture to make it more inclusive, what happens is there's always a blowback, as we've seen in the US of A and other places around the world. Because as an anarchist, I'm interested in creating not a cultural norm, but cultures which reflect the more egalitarian aspects of our community. You've been listening to the Anarchist World This Week, broadcast across Australia via the Community Radio Network. This program has been streaming live on 3cr.org.au. That's 3cr.org.au. My name is Joseph Toscano. A few web pages just in case you're interested. YouTube, public interest before corporate interest. You can join them today. Go to pibci.net. Another web page, anarchistmedia.org. Facebook pages, Joseph Toscano, Toscano for Flinders. You can leave messages on 0439 395 489. Now, if you were listening to this program on the 19th of March 2025, this evening at Footscray, I'll be doing a dissertation, lecture, presentation, whatever you like to call it, at the Footscray Hotel at 7pm, 6:30pm for a 7pm start on the Great Depression and whether there are any parallels with the globe today. Now, on Saturday, the 22nd of March, if you're interested in the Flinders for Toscano for Flinders campaign, you can join me and supporters at the barbecue recreational area opposite the Rosebud Hotel. That's next to the Rosebud Bowls Club and the Rosebud Village Green, midday to 3pm. Bring food and drinks to share. And if you're around Frankston area, next week, on the 26th of March, we'll be having our normal gathering at 6:30pm at La Porquettes in Frankston. Now, there's many more stuff coming up, but ultimately, as I said during the program, you've got that choice. You can close your eyes, put your head in the sand and wait for it to be decapitated, or you can be part of a resistance movement that actually looks at alternatives. Talk is important, but just as important is organisation, and even more important is action which comes from that organisation. Thank you once again for listening to the Anarchist World This Week, courtesy of the Community Radio Network on your local community radio station. And you can always leave messages, that's pleasant ones. You can leave unpleasant ones, but I'll delete them, on 0439 395 489. 0439 395 489. So maybe next week we'll have more pleasant things to talk about. Who knows? That's the great thing of living in 2025. You know exactly what's happening on the other side of the world, but you've got no idea what your neighbour, who they are, what they're thinking. That's the great thing of being an isolated individual. So it's been a pleasure on my part talking to you, not talking at you, talking with you, and hopefully you got something out of today's Anarchist World this week. If you did, listen in next week, and if you didn't, well, listen in again next week, and maybe you will get something out of it.
Evil minds that plot destruction, sorcerer of death's construction.
An analysis you'll never hear anywhere else. Anarchist World this week. Australia's sacred cow slaughterhouse. 10 a.m. every Wednesday. Listen to the Anarchist World this week for an up-to-date analysis of local, national and international events.
Poisoning their brainwashed minds. Oh, Lord, yeah.
You might have heard about the Community Radio Plus app, but it's only when you start using it that you'll wonder how you lived without it.
You can listen to us wherever you are, at home, work, driving,
On public transport, gardening, protesting, or even in the bath.
just search Community Radio Plus wherever you get your apps.
You've been listening to a 3CR podcast produced in the studios of independent community radio station 3CR in Melbourne, Australia. For more information, go to allthews.3cr.org.au.